Did Lawler ever miss with his fireball?
Well, if he got the fireball off, it didn't miss. And I mean, I've seen the Sheik, because he did it so often. Every once in a while, Sheiks would go sideways, but he would usually make such a big ball that it would be close enough for rock and roll with whatever anyway. But I've said with Lawler, that's the time he and the Iron Sheik were going back and forth with the fireballs, right? That was the one night. No, it was in Louisville at Jimmy Hart and the First Family were holding Lawler. And Sheik had the paper and had the lighter, and that's where he's going, Jimmy, it won't strike. It won't strike. He had the paper, but the lighter had gotten wet. So the next night, they're in Evansville, and this in the finish, Lawler's going to hit Sheik with the fireball. Well, his goddamn paper got wet, and the paper wouldn't fucking. So then they'd already made the promos for the next week in Evansville where Lawler talked about burning the Sheik, giving him a taste of his own medicine the previous week. So what Lawler did was he threw Sheik out on the floor and he grabbed his lighter and he took him all around every side of ringside, flicking the bick in his face while fucking Sheik sold, oh my God, it burns. To show everybody that he'd burned it.
That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
Well, quick thinking though, right? Because the interviews we're going to play. What
are the people at ringside thinking he's chasing him with a big lighter?
Oh, he had him in a headlock and he was taking him in front of everybody, flicking the bick in his face and screaming, hit the burns, hit the burns, hit the burns. Yeah. But I mean, things like that. I mean, you know, sometimes you go to hit a guy with a bottle, break a bottle over his head, and the bottle will break too soon. One of the most famous was when Jimmy Valiant rolled into the ring on Lawler and Harley Race in December of 1977 in the NWA title match. They'd gone 60 minutes to a draw the week before. And at the end of the 60 minutes, Lawler had him covered. So they come back the next week with a 90-minute time limit. And in that one, everybody thought, okay, Lawler's going to win the world title. And Jimmy Valiant, who wasn't even booked on the card, came in street clothes right when Lawler had just got Harley Race. He'd given him the pile driver because the referee was down. And the people knew that he had Harley at that point. And Jimmy Valiant comes in with a bottle. And he's going to roll in. And as Lawler comes up, like, what the fuck? He's going to break the bottle over his head, right? Well, as Jimmy jumped the rope that was around the ring and started to come up on the apron, his foot, or however he started to roll in the ring, his foot or knee or whatever slipped off the apron, and it caused him to boom down on the apron of the ring for a second, and that bottle started falling apart. And he had it palmed in his hand, and he was able to get the swing and hit Lawler with his close enough for rock and roll. People popped. But if you slow-mo the existing film, you can actually see a piece or two of the bottle falling out of his hand before he got to the head. So then he fucking not only, boom, he broke the bottle over his head. Lawler goes down, and then he comes up on his knees, and Valiant takes the broken bottle and not only rips him down the arm, but stabs him in the fucking heart. And Lawler bladed his chest and his arm, and they called an ambulance. And he went to the hospital and got stitches. It was reported in the newspaper. No charges were filed, is what the report said. But wrestler Valiant stabs Jerry Lawler. And when not only he went to the hospital and got the stitches, but he came out on TV the following Saturday morning with stitches in his chest and arm. And the people, oh my God. That's why Valiant was such a fucking hot heel when he first came in. They did, God, it may have been 13 or 14 weeks that program went. Almost weekly, almost all singles, every once in a while a tag team match. But Lawler and Valiant, it was insane. And they kept doing shit like that to keep the interest up, and fuck, people went to kill Handsome. But anyway, where were we? Oh, did it fireballs or anything like that? Yes, this is not a movie It's not Hollywood. You don't get a second chance. It's not Memorex ever. It's fucking live when you're in front of the people, and also when you're not using movie props. They may now. Well, they do now. We know they figured out a way to have fake barbed wire and movie candy glass and all that stuff. But in the territory days, there was never any kind of movie prop. You were modifying existing materials. It was a real bottle. You just treated it. Or, we've talked about the various things. The real chairs, real tables, real everything. There was hopefully at some point some element of illusion or trickery to it or preparation involved. But so, yeah, sometimes those things misfire, which is why you've got to know what you're doing, and everybody's got to be on the same page and before you do it. And I would just bet that's probably, the first time they've ever used any kind of apparatus like that.
If the angle where Jerry Lawler got run over by Eddie Gilbert happened in the late 70s, if it was Jimmy Valiant or someone else, would the same thing have happened? Just based on the difference in the late 70s versus 1990, would the police have made the same thing happen where Lawler would have to come out on the show as opposed to going to the hospital and no charges are pressed?
Honestly, it would have probably been a bigger issue because civilians would have come to the station in the late 70s.
There were more viewers of the show in the late 70s.
Well, no, but not only that, but also they would have come to take matters in their own hands, I think. They would have, instead of just calling the police saying, my God, Eddie Gilbert's just killed Jerry Lawler on live television, I think they would have come themselves to try to get a hold of Eddie Gilbert. And then the Channel 5 would have been calling the cops to keep the people out of the parking lot rather than the other way around.
If people showed up to get a wrestler, could Lance Russell, did he have enough presence with those wrestling fans that he could talk them down if it got to that point? Do you think?
Yes. Unless there was a physical situation happening and people didn't hear him or it was already started or whatever. No, every wrestling fan in Memphis, if Lance Russell had appeared in the parking lot or said something in the studio or whatever he said, as long as they heard him, they would have done whatever he said. But if something had happened, and they didn't know it was Lance, Lance, I didn't know it was you trying to pull me off or whatever. But yeah, there was the difference, I think, in the amount of people that had smartened up and the fact that, there was less heat and the viewership was less at that point and the whole thing. The difference in 1979 or 80 and 1990 would have been that there would have been, I don't know how many actual civilians go to the TV station and either see if Lawler was dead or try to get hold of Eddie Gilbert or both. Because, it's not like that they didn't have issues to begin with, just in a lot of cases back in the 70s, just dispersing the crowd that couldn't get in Saturday morning taping because the tickets were free, but you had to have a ticket because there was a rule about how many people the TV station could allow legally in the studio. And everybody had to have, a ticket, which was sent out by the TV station with a date on it. And that way they only sent out their quota, but all the kids that lived in the neighborhood knew that if everybody who had a ticket didn't show up, they would let some extra people in at the last minute. And that's how you ended up with all those kids in there every week. But it was 6 months waiting list to get a ticket to studio wrestling from the TV station at that point. If you wrote in January, they might have something they can send you for June. And then if you can't show up that day, well, then one of the little kids gets your spot.
At what point did you realize you can go every week?
When I got into business.
Was it right away? As soon as you started taking photos, you knew you could?
No, when I got in the business as a manager.
Oh, in 82.
Mine, an 800-mile round trip to go to TV every Saturday morning from Louisville for free? Fuck.